Father in heaven, we thank you for this time that we have to share together, to come together and hear a message from your word, Lord. We pray that we would look back on the things that you've written down for us, that you've revealed to us, so that we might uh, take the warnings that we need and follow the examples where they lead us toward righteousness. God, we pray that you would be with all the things that we as a congregation, as individuals do, and with each other and in the world around us. We pray that you would bless our efforts, help us to bring you glory in all that we do. Help us to grow your kingdom, Lord. We'll pray for all the teachers this evening and all of the students that they may be prepared to learn and apply what they are being taught. We pray all of these things in your Son's name. Amen.
Our song for tonight will be Farther Along, number 635. We'll be singing the first, second, and last verses only. Let's sing. Tempted and treasured, all makes me wonder why it should be thus all the day long, while there are others sitting about us, never molested, though in the wrong. Farther along we'll know all about it. Farther along we'll understand why. Cheer up, my brother, live in the sunshine. We'll understand it all by and by. When death has come and taken our loved ones, it leaves our homes so lonely and drear. Then do we wonder why others prosper, living so wicked year after year. Farther along we'll know all about it. Farther along we'll understand why. Cheer up, my brother, live in the sunshine. We'll understand it all by and by. When we see Jesus coming in glory, when he comes from his home in the sky, then we shall meet him in that bright mansion. We'll understand it all by and by. Farther along we'll
when he passed away, because that just kind of holds a special place in my heart. I remember reading through the entire Pentateuch, and when Moses passed away there at the end, I just remember weeping one of the times, just because I read it really quickly. I was having to teach a class, and I thought he had such an incredible life. So that's what I was going to choose. And I told somebody the other day, Tommy South, if you're listening, Tommy, you shouldn't have done that. Anyway, he had already taken it, and so I said, well, I'll start with the beginning. So that's what we're doing Exodus 1 and 2 tonight. So I think we've entitled it Moses, the Preparation. And it's interesting that, as I'll just say here at the beginning, that Moses himself really doesn't do a lot of preparation. All of his preparation is simply life happening to him, and him making, what we would consider probably a bad decision, at least one, and yet it works out for him. And you'll see, I think the way God sees things, it'll give you an idea of how even the things we do in sin, God has its way of it reflecting something else in our life. And you'll see that when we get there. Hopefully I'll be able to demonstrate that to you. But before we begin, I want to ask you, actually, I'll read Exodus 2:25 first. I always try to choose a single verse to kind of encapsulate what we're thinking. This is the last one. He says, it reads, God saw the sons of Israel and God took notice of them. And that's essentially why Moses exists. That's why he did what he did, because God heard the affliction of his people. And you'll see that, and I'll repeat this later, but you'll see it repeated even in just these two chapters, where there'll be the people crying out, and then a story about Moses, and then it returns to the people crying out. So he is almost this character interspersed with God coming to save his people. So he kind of takes on that within himself. So the first question I want to ask is, what to you makes, what makes a life and story meaningful and beautiful? What makes a life and a story meaningful and beautiful? And you can answer out loud if you want. I'll pause for a second. What is it to you that makes a life meaningful and beautiful? It's a hard question, because the answer to it means, I think most of us at least have an answer in the back of our mind, but the answer to a question that a life that is meaningful and beautiful is rarely the life that we want to live, because it usually means we're going to have to suffer. It usually means that we're going to have to stand against some odds that are stacked against us, and this is what we're going to see in Moses. When you tell your story, whatever your story happens to be, when you speak of your own witness to what God has done, what will that entail? Maybe that'll help us think about what it is that makes a story meaningful and beautiful. Now, what would your story be? Would it be what a nice vehicle you have? Is that what you want people to hear at the end? Or will it be how life was easy and, I just went along swing? I mean, what would be the story of your life that you would tell? For most of us, it would be, this is how I grew up. And I remember my grandfather telling me how poor they were and how difficult life was, and how, even though he was a coal miner, that it gave him this opportunity to make a better life for himself. And that was the story that he told, not how easy things were. And so I want you to think in those terms when we start thinking about Moses, because Moses' life at no point, other than possibly those first years in Pharaoh's house, was easy. Because, and guess what? I guess how important that part of the story is, before I get too far ahead of myself. How important was the part of him living in Pharaoh's house? How important was that? You know how I can tell you it wasn't very important? We are told nothing about it, except that he was there. Right? So that demonstrates to you, there were things he learned probably in Pharaoh's house. There are probably things that were great there, but that is not the part of the story that matters, at least in this telling. Okay? So I'm going to try to read some passages, read some verses, and we're going to make it through 2 chapters, so I won't be able to read them all. And I'll tell you this before we get started. Number one, I would speak of 2 things if I were telling my story. Number one is how God has blessed me. What has God done? And then the second would be, and you're going to see that in this story, and you're going to see it over and over in Exodus. And the second one is, I would tell you, if I had the courage, if I had the honesty, And if I had the authenticity, and that's hard to find, but if I had those things, I would tell you about my sufferings and I would tell you about my failures. Because those are the ways that you're going to see how God has blessed me, even in the face of my own imperfection. And that, again, is what you're going to see in the life of Moses. Now, the story of Moses possesses all that makes story beautiful and meaningful. As you encounter Moses from week to week throughout the summer, you will see plainly the acts of God. And what are some of those acts? Miracles, we might call them, before we even get started tonight. Because most of us aren't going to, you got the 10 plagues, like darkness and frogs and gnats and whatever else. Right? You're going to see a lot of that. You're going to see the Red Sea parted, clearly an act of God. But what you will also see is the best and worst of humanity. You will also see the best and the worst of humanity. And some of that you will see tonight. In fact, if you read Exodus, you will likely be reminded of Moses' humanity more than this halo of perfection we have often placed over his head. And don't misunderstand me, Moses is Moses, and there's a reason. He was awesome. But what you're going to see, especially with this first sin, we'll say of his, is his imperfection. You're going to see that in Exodus 3 as well, but I don't want to ruin anyone else's for next week, so I won't go there. But you will see him fight against God and what God is asking him to do. He is an incredible man, but to me, he's less like Jesus and more like David or Paul. Not because of his perceived piety, but because of what God did with a reluctant prophet and judge. He did not want this job. He did not want to do what he did. And so because of that, I think of David and Paul. But Paul also thought he had life figured out, thought the direction he was going to go, and then he says, I consider that garbage in lieu of the gospel. Like Paul says of himself in Galatians, and if you read Galatians recently, you'll remember this, we glorify God because of the humanity of Moses. You remember what Paul says? They glorified God because of me. And not because of what a great guy he was, but because he turned to the gospel in the face of who he was before. Of course, there are some gaps, as you'll see in the story of Moses, which also makes the story, I think, more compelling and more interesting, where our imagination, we can start to think, what was it like in Pharaoh's house? Because there are however many years in between where we just don't know what that was like. It may be other questions like these. These are just some I have. What goes on in a man's heart as he ages as a criminal refugee and sees the oppression of his people? So in other words, we attribute it to God, what's happening, and that's likely the case. But as a man in his 40s, I know what it's like to begin to think about life midway through. And particularly here, he is in another country as a refugee, because when I say refugee, not in the good sense, like he left because Pharaoh was trying to kill him. Or ask yourself, what drives a man to seek the place and people from whence he came? So in other words, he leaves and goes to Midian, but then at some point, what else is he going to do? Why does he bother killing an Egyptian? Does anybody remember? Is it because he hates injustice? Why? Do you remember? We're going to read it in a moment. Why does he kill the Egyptian and hide him in the sand? Mistreating who? His brothers in the flesh. You see that? So, in other words, what does it say about a man that he looks, though he grew up in Pharaoh's house? And you're going to see he is even considered by the people in Midian as an Egyptian. He knows better. He's a Hebrew. He sees this Egyptian mistreating a Hebrew, and that is when he steps in. And then finally, what compels a man to take on a task that he would rather not? Anybody in there ever done something you didn't want to do, but you knew you had to do it? Probably from little to great. We remember that. And here he is at task with something immense, and he does his best to sidestep it, and God will not let him. But again, that's another lesson for another time. All right. Again, many years of Moses' life are glossed over. But as Moses grows older, and even after his moving away from all he knew in the land of Midian, we are reminded of his suffering people, their distress in crying out to God. This is the refrain, and I'll read this for us here. Actually, I'll read it from this one. He says, the first one is Exodus 1:14. They made their lives bitter, they being the Egyptians, with hard labor and mortar and bricks, and had all kinds of labor in the field, all their labors which they rigorously imposed on them. By the way, in my translation, if you see italics, that's not mine. Those are the translators. They're trying to add words there to make it make sense. But in a New American Standard, they added in italics, so you know that is not the actual word. Okay? And the next, in the end of Exodus 2, the sons of Israel sighed because of the bondage, and they cried out, and their cry for help because of their bondage rose up to God. So God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God saw the sons of Israel, and God took notice. Or in other words, added here, God took notice of them. So as the story progresses, you begin to realize the answer to their prayers is not yet in the parting of seas. It is not yet in the destruction of a kingdom through these plagues. To begin, the answer to their prayers is a baby boy taken from the waters of the Nile, raised in the house of Pharaoh, who will live as a refugee on foreign soil. That is how God's redemption for his people begins. The story of Moses begins with, as I said, oppression and salvation. The Israelites, after so many years of living in the land, have become enslaved. Their enslavement was bitter, it was hard, so we're told they cry out to God. These things are written plainly in the text. You don't have to sift through this to try to figure it out. But I want to tell you this, and this is something I think that's hard for us to recognize because of how many years it's been, or how many, let's say, millennia it has been since this time. But Moses is an exception, not the rule. What happened to most of the boys who were born in these decades? I'll let you say it. They were murdered. Moses is the exception. As I thought about that in the last couple of days getting this together, that was a hard realization. They were rejoiced because Moses was saved, but how many others lost their lives because of the oppression of someone else? So keep that in mind. Most of these boys, again, were killed as the Egyptians decreed that they would be. The first were supposed to be killed as soon as they were born. And once that didn't work, and we'll talk about this second, then what happens? What are they told to do? And interestingly, Moses' mother kind of obeys. What are they told? Throw him in the river. Yeah, and she kind of did that. So I don't know if that was a purposeful, I tell you what, I'm going to throw him in, but I'll gently place him in and keep my eyes on him. So I don't know, what was in her mind, but that is what happens. But out of their own Nile, out of this decree that they sent would come not a dying or rising God, as they might believe, but a little crying Hebrew baby. The more the Egyptians afflicted the Hebrews, the more they multiplied. And this reminds me of something. You're going to see, by the way, parallels between a lot of things in Genesis, particularly Noah, and Moses. I'm going to show them to you. The first one is this, I think. It talks about they multiplied, and this is the word that is used. What is told to Adam and Eve, and what is told to Noah and his family after they come off the ark. Be fruitful and multiply. And so this is a demonstration that this is what the people have done. They have multiplied such that the Egyptians were afraid of them. Now, the Egyptians their plans would backfire on them. In their minds, they thought, we are going to enslave them and work these Hebrews into submission. In other words, we're going to give them so much to do, they're really not going to be able to react against us because they just can't. They won't be able to. It does backfire on them because they've had enough and they start crying out to God, and God hears that, and so it works in the Hebrews' favor. And so again, it works for a time, but people have little to lose when they rise up when you treat them like that. So it's like, you know what, we might as well try to do something because we're being oppressed to the point we can do nothing else. And so they simply needed someone to help them, which is Moses, someone to prove to them God desired to take them back home. And where is home? Don't forget, our wilderness wanderings, we act like that's the place they were supposed to be. It wasn't. The wilderness wanderings, they wandered for so long, but they weren't supposed to be there. Where were they supposed to be? Back home where Abraham had gone, right? This is the place that I'm going to give you and your people. So that's where they were supposed to have been headed. Now, part of the Egyptian plan was to kill the children, the male children. And why do you think that would be? And I'll just ask you this question. Why would that be? Why kill the men? I'll give you a hint. I don't think it has anything to do with procreation. Warriors. There you go. People who are going to rise up. Somebody who can do something. All right? I absolutely think that's the reason why. I could be wrong, but that's why I think. But Shiphrah and Puah, two women, interestingly, and maybe more women that we don't know, we're just given these two names, disobeyed these orders and saved the male children. Right? We might call this today civil disobedience of some kind, but they were told to kill these male children, and they did not. Right? And because they thought it better. And I would assume most of us would also think it better than to do that. But it took a lot of bravery for these two women and whomever else may have done that. And then we're told, and I do appreciate the way that this is written. Now, a man from the house of Levi went and married a daughter of Levi. That's in chapter 2, verse 1. And who are these two? I have it written up here so you can see it. But who are these two? We're told later. We're not told here. All right? Amram and Jochebed. Very good. Once we see the lineage, we see that. And you see that in Exodus 6:20, Numbers 26:29. There are two different places where we're told that. So that's who that is. And what's interesting is it seems like because they were killing the males, they were trying to keep an army from uprising, but what they didn't realize, and the Psalms say it a lot, is God doesn't need an army to defeat somebody. Right? In this case, they don't raise a sword at all. They just walk across on dry land, and then God causes the water to fall on them. So that is another plan that backfired on them. Now, because of the bravery, I should say, of these midwives, Pharaoh resorts to some other plans. And what are the other plans? We've already kind of mentioned them, but I want to see how well you know the story. If you're reading, you're welcome to read along. What are Pharaoh's other plans? Shiphrah and Puah were able to keep them around, so they decide we're going to throw them in the river. All right, that's in verse number 21. Because the midwives feared God, he established households for him, he being God. Then Pharaoh commanded all his people, saying, every son who is born, you are to cast it into the Nile, and every daughter you are to keep alive. So now, rather than the midwives he's talking to, what does he say it to? Everybody. You see a male child born, you intercede and make sure this child is cast into the river. Does that sound like a difficult thing to stomach in our days? It should, yeah. I mean, this is a horrendous thing to happen. Now, a man from Levi, we're told, married a daughter of Levi, and from this union came a little boy, whose name, according to the text, is given to him by whom? Not his father or his mother. Who? Yeah, the Pharaoh's daughter. Very good. And what is that name? What is his name? Moses. Very good. I think this is a beautiful part of the story here. How long was his mother able to hide him and keep him? 3 months. 3 months. Does anybody have any ideas as to why she couldn't hide him anymore? I have no clue. I'm just asking you kind of what does your imagination say, those of you who have had 3 months old in your own houses? Maybe making too much noise. Yeah, very good. Very good. And maybe just getting big enough to where if she had to go out, she couldn't hide him somewhere, just something. Okay. Anyone else have any ideas? That was kind of where my mind went, just getting to be big enough and loud enough to where they couldn't hide him anymore. All right. Very good, because at some point she has to leave. She can't just hide out inside all the time. So either way, for 3 months, this child was hidden by his mother. But when she could no longer hide him, I think, again, she ironically places him in the Nile. Because they were told to throw him in the Nile to kill him, but she makes this little basket for him to place him there. Most of us, I think, when we think of a river, we think of this huge river that's flowing really hard and the white water and stuff like that. But think bigger and think slower and think little inlets and things where maybe this basket could sit still for a while and you could keep an eye on it. That's more what is happening here. Does that make sense to everybody? Because otherwise, I don't think of Milo and Otis. Has you ever seen Milo and Otis? Where he gets to falls in the basket and he's running down. Yeah, don't think about that. Think of more just kind of in the bulrushes or whatever it is, kind of hiding there. And that's more along the line. Because what do we find out about Pharaoh's daughter? She's coming down to take a bath. She's coming down to bathe. And so very likely that's not going to be in the rushing white water or something like that. It's going to be in something that's nice and calm and quiet. So that gives you an idea what she is. So this was not, because it's easy to give Jochebed a hard time. Like, what in the world are you doing to this? But this, she sends her daughter, whom I'm assuming is Miriam, to take it, to keep an eye on him. So it's not something quite as rash as we may think about it at first, even though it is a difficult thing for any of us to think about doing. But I want to tell you this, I think is really, really interesting. She lays him, we call it in a basket made of reeds. The word is ark. This word is only used. I actually thought Ark of the Covenant was the same word. It is not when I looked it up. This word is only used in Genesis 6, 7, 8, and 9. What happens there? It's Noah's Ark. And then it happens twice in Exodus 2, 3, and Exodus 2, 5, both talking about this basket or ark. And they both refer to this basket. And what does it happen to be lined with, by the way? Pitch and tar, the same thing that they would put on Noah's Ark. So just like the water saved Noah, the water also now has saved Moses. Pretty interesting, right? And again, this is the only 2 times in the Old Testament, the only 2 passages, we'll say, in the New Testament that this word ark is used, lest you think it's a stretch. It's pretty incredible, really. And it's not something we think about. Does anybody have any comments on that? Something you'd like to mention? Is that, I will take a moment for that. I don't mean to lecture the whole time. Yeah. Correct. 321. Yep, agreed. Yeah, agreed. And I'm going to mention a few things too, if you don't mind. Anybody else have anything first, though, before I do that? About the ark? Well, okay. Maybe I'll mention those in just a second when we get down to when she picks him up. But before we get there, let's take a minute and consider pity or mercy or compassion. In the midst of suffering and mercilessness, what do we get a glimpse here of still? Mercy, compassion, or pity. Pharaoh's daughter comes down to bathe, and she finds this small child. Listen to this moving line that brought tears to my eyes as I prepared for this. When she opened it, she saw the child, and the boy was crying, and she had pity on him. If you read in the context there, she also knows this is a Hebrew baby. She, as Pharaoh's daughter, knows what the edict is, and yet pity for a crying baby makes her adopt this child, take him into her own house. Is that not incredible? They're supposed to be enemies. There is nothing like a baby to make an enemy and even a slave seem like a human. We can hardly hate innocence, a human who has not yet learned what an enemy is. She looks at this male child and does not see someone who could cost her life. Instead, we are told she has pity or compassion or mercy on a crying baby all by himself. I will point out before I take a comment, as I said before, she recognizes this child is a Hebrew baby and saves him anyway. And as I said, she takes him as her own and raises him in her house. And not only that, he becomes human enough to have a name. What is his name? Moses. Why does she name him Moses? It's because it's what his name means. Because I have, and here's the same thing he was just talking about, because I have taken him out of the water. Pretty incredible, right? And I should note this will not be the only time Moses is saved by the water. When they passed through the Red Sea, they were also saved by water. If you remember 1 Corinthians 10, what are we told that represents? Paul says. He says, were not all the Israelites baptized into Moses by crossing the Red Sea? And so it's interesting here, water does play such a powerful part in the redemption of Israel here, and of course, as we see it passed on into our own redemption. So anybody have any comments before we move on? I don't want to rush this by any means. I want to take time here. I would say you can ask a question. I'm not sure I can answer it, but you can most certainly ask it, and we'll discuss it. Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Correct. Correct. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Correct. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Correct. Thank you. And that's a good point to make. And I love the point that you make, and that a particular part of the point you make, and that is this, that it's not just Shipper and Pua that make the right decision. We would expect that, right? We're on their side. When I say we, I mean Christians. Like, oh, yeah, they did the right thing. Who else made the right decision? Who else did the right thing? The enemy. I mean, it's Pharaoh's daughter. Like, they were the ones that, like, we could have just looked at her and just lumped them all in together. Well, see these Egyptians, how horrible they are. I don't know about all the rest of them, but one of them made a good decision, made the right decision of saving this child. So that's a really good point you make, that they're on either side of this spectrum, but they both are able to make the right decision and do the right thing. Yeah, living in their narrative. And is it scary to anyone, or is it, maybe not the term scary is right, but that we're living in our own times, in our own narrative, as to, are we making the right decisions? Are we on the right side? You know, am I Pharaoh's daughter, or am I Pharaoh? Right? I mean, that's a hard one. But of course, I hope we're all prayerfully answering that ourselves as we're living our lives. But that's a beautiful point to make. And sometimes it's hard to know until later. And we can look back and think, man, maybe I should have reacted differently, or maybe I should have, tried harder for something else. But thank you very much. That's a very interesting point. Does anybody want to speak to that? No. I thought about that. I don't know. I don't know. Undoubtedly, he eventually kind of accepts him, but we'll see we are told outright, once he steps over by killing, Pharaoh tries to kill him. So there was a limit to what. The reason why I asked the question, because I thought, well, was Moses afraid of what Pharaoh was going to do? And clearly he was, when I read through it again. So I don't know. What do you guys think? What do you think Pharaoh thought of this little Hebrew baby that got brought in? Maybe she hid him for a while. I don't know. Prince of Egypt not Prince of Egypt. Yeah, is it the Prince of Egypt? Yeah, answers some of that. They try to fill in some of those gaps. But that's kind of the fun of the gaps, is like you wonder, like, how did this work out? Because we do not believe this is only a story, correct? We believe this happened. And so it does intrigue us as, like, what did that look like? And how did they respond? I don't know. Very good question. I wish I could answer for you. Yeah, well, I think I wrote either grandson or something like that in my, because that's essentially what he was. Yeah. You wonder about how the legality of things work then, but when you're Pharaoh's daughter, you adopt whoever you want to adopt. So she brought him in, and he becomes part of the household, and must have had a pretty easy life because he did not have to do what the other Hebrews did. And that's what when we get to the end here and we talk about the letter of Hebrews, the way it speaks of the faith of Moses is that part of his faith is saying he could have stayed in Pharaoh's house, but instead he chose to be oppressed with his people, which is a powerful thing. Yeah. So very good question. I have no clue. Anybody else have anything to speak on that? Yeah. Right. Well, what if he happens to just come out of my arms and I take care of him? Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. Absolutely. Hmm. Of course. Agreed. Hmm. His name. Agreed. I love it. I love it. And notice again how he takes on Israel. We'll say the Hebrews for now for himself. Or takes on the Israelites for himself because what are they also? What is God doing with them? Remember, we talked about the story coming back and forth. What was he doing with them? He's drawing them out through the water of the Red Sea. Like it is incredible. It really, really is. Yeah. Thank you. Anyone else? Powerful story. And it gets even more awesome, does it not? Because now, not only is he taken care of by this woman who draws him out of the water, he's going to have a good education, very likely, in the house of Pharaoh. He is going to look like an Egyptian, and whether or not you think that is so, I will demonstrate to you that is most definitely the case by the time we get to the end. And oh, by the way, before I get any farther, I wrote here in my notes for myself, God bless Pharaoh's daughter. It's like in my head, I thought, God bless her for what she did. But of course, we know that Moses is also, go ahead. I actually thought about that, and I have no clue. I'm assuming she was young, but honestly, I have no clue. But I will say that she may have been unmarried, and most definitely likely did not have a child because she has someone else nurse him. So those are a few pieces you can piece together. So I don't know if she was just so young as to not have had a child, or she's beyond and just doesn't happen to have a child at the time. But she does have someone else come nurse him. So. Um, That's a good question. I don't know, and maybe she. I will share something personal. I hope she had passed on already. You know what I mean? Because of what the Egyptians were going to face, I hope that she was spared some of that because of her kindness to him. But I honestly don't know. I don't know. Does anybody know? Does it say off the top of my head? I don't know. I don't think so. I think we're just kind of left to wonder. Yeah, he's so old. That's what I mean. I know that. So I just assume she's passed away. Very much like what we think with Joseph in the New Testament a lot. He's mentioned at the beginning of Jesus' life, and by the time we get going, most people assume he's probably passed away just because he just kind of is not mentioned anymore. So very good point. Thank you. Because Moses was 80 by the time he gets back. I mean, it's, you know what I mean? It's a long time. And because they spent 40 years in the wilderness, he dies or he's taken, we should say, at 120. All right. Very good. Very good discussion questions. So now, not only does this woman save him, what else happens? Who gets to take care of him? She sees his sister, which again, I'm assuming is Miriam. He may have had more than one, but we know he's got one sister named Miriam, who goes and gets who? His mother. And so he gets to basically be raised and nursed by his own mother. I mean, it's just incredible how God situates this. Do y'all think this is as incredible as I do? I hope so. I hope so. Yeah. And gets paid to raise her son. Absolutely, yeah. It's incredible. So now she's making a living for her household. It's incredible. Agreed. And I even wrote that here. We know that Moses is nursed by his mother for pay. So this mother who had sent her son into the Nile, not knowing what might happen, received him back again. Makes me think about a possible allusion to Jesus himself, right? Where she has received her son back. But God had acted in a mighty way through the mercy of a young woman. And this is not the last time Moses would be saved through the water. Now, many years pass, and Moses himself has a moment of compassion, but he does not react the same way this woman does. You might want to call it just passion. But he sees the affliction of his people. He knows who he is, and somehow he knows where he came from. And what makes you think, why do you think he knows those things before I move on any further? I have an idea. Remember who raised him, who nursed him at least, his mom. So my assumption is she kind of let him know. You look like an Egyptian, you do Egyptian stuff, but don't forget who you are. I can see her telling the boy this. So at any rate, he knows where he came from. And so he sees this fellow Hebrew being beaten. His compassion turns to anger, and he kills the Egyptian. So in other words, I think he sees his fellow being beaten, and he wants to have pity on him. He has compassion, but it just kind of bleeds over into this anger that he's apparently just couldn't control. And then he hides him in the sand. Now at this point, rather than a hero, how do his own people see him? You can read it a little farther down if you want. How do they see him? Oh, look at here, the judge and the ruler. You're gonna kill us too, brother? And now he begins to think, if these people know about it, I wonder if somebody else knows about what I've done, right? And so he's scoffed at before he's ever considered a hero. Anybody have any comments or questions there before we move on? And I feel like that's a pretty interesting thing too, because we usually see Moses as the hero. He's the one who has put all this stuff into place. All right? So essentially they're asking, who do you think you are? And interestingly enough, by them asking this question, they're mocking him. But little did the man know who said this, Moses would become both prince and judge, but Moses himself didn't even know that yet. So he hides and he runs away. And I can't blame him. But isn't it interesting how, and this happens a lot in the Bible, and I think it's probably happened in your own life too, how you almost speak these prophetic words against yourself or for yourself later on. These guys are not meaning to be prophets by any means by saying who is going to make you ruler and judge, but it is almost this prophetic utterance that they're saying because he does become ruler and judge. It's pretty incredible the way that happens. Now, again, I can't say I blame Moses for running away because, in his mind, what if somebody finds out? Would having been raised in Pharaoh's house save him? And what's the answer to that? No, because Pharaoh is the one trying to kill him. So, yeah, I love you, man. Glad you're in the house, but can't do this. So I'm looking to kill you. And so we're told, again, Pharaoh himself tried to kill Moses. But just like his birth, Moses hid. First, she hid him for 3 months and then hides him in the Nile, and now he's going to hide himself in this place in Midian. So, for far different reasons than Abraham, his ancestor, Moses disappears into a foreign land. So notice the connection there too. Abraham is asked to leave and go into Canaan's land, and he's a sojourner because God just told him to go out. Here in Moses' case, I have committed murder, and I must go out into a foreign land in order to hide, to get myself together kind of thing. And it's interesting to me that God still uses him after all, the 40 years that he's there, that I'll let you hide for a little bit, I'll let you get yourself together, but do not think I'm not sending you back. I'll be there. I'm coming, he's coming in the burning bush to send Moses back, but not for now. And there, I think this is interesting too. Y'all ready for this? You don't look ready. And there, just like at his birth, he finds compassion where? Near the water. We are told he sat by the well. Sat down by a well. And what happens at this well? Anybody remember what happens at this well? W-H-A-L-E. Oh, I'm just kidding. W-E-L-L. Sat down by a well. There was a priest there, and I'm assuming this is just kind of a random priest. Now, you can't be sure it's a priest of Yahweh by any means. We haven't been told that's who this is, but a priest nonetheless, who had 7 daughters, and they come to the well for water. Apparently, he was not with them. These daughters were harassed in some way by some shepherds and run off. And so Moses takes his first stand, well, I should say his second stand as a mediator. His first stand, what did he do as mediator? He killed. In this case, he stands up for these women and then allows them to come and helps them draw this water for their flocks. Says they fill their troughs as well. So they come back to Reuel, their father. He is also known as Jethro. And there is where you can see that in Exodus 3:1. There's a few other places too. He has two names, or he's called by two names. Anyway, so he comes back to their father, Jethro, or Reuel, and he insisted that they bring Moses back to have something to eat. So in other words, what in the world? Why don't you leave the dude out there? Bring him back. You know, I mean, if he's going to be that nice to you, he's still out there. Man's probably hungry. So notice what they call him. Notice what they call him. I'm going to get there for you real quick if I can see it. Verse number 19. So they, the daughters, said, an Egyptian. An Egyptian. Isn't that interesting? So we just assume, oh, he looks like a Hebrew, but they thought he was an Egyptian. So there was something about him. I don't know if it was his look or just kind of his demeanor or whatever, but they call him an Egyptian. And then we're told Moses, quote unquote, dwells with the man. What does yours say there? What's that? Content to live well. That's good. Anybody else other than that? That's essentially what it is. In other words, he dwells with them. I don't know if it means he lives nearby and they have their own little group, almost like Abraham, or that he actually lived with them. Seems that's to be the case because what happens soon afterwards? He marries one of his daughters, and her name is, I have it written up here, Zipporah, all right? And they have a son. Oh, and I also should be pointed out, and this comes out later on, I don't know, because y'all are looking at Exodus, it won't, but if you were in Numbers, it will. Moses' sister and brother, what do they get upset about? Him marrying a woman who was not a Hebrew. So notice she is not a Hebrew. You know, she's a foreigner. So they named their son Gershom, who means stranger there. That's what the name means. Because, quote, he had been a stranger in a foreign land. So almost always in the Old Testament, by the way, a name means something. We don't, they didn't choose names because, the way we do. We choose names either because we like the way it sounds. Maybe sometimes it does mean something to us, and maybe it's just the only name we couldn't think of somebody we didn't like. We didn't want to name our kid that, right? But here, most of the time they have meaning, and that's what it has here. And so much like Abraham and his people living in Egypt, as I said, they're living in a foreign land. So it makes sense that the story would shift again after Gershom living in a foreign land. Where do we shift back to? Those three verses I mentioned at the beginning. To the Hebrews, to the people. God saw the sons of Israel and he took notice of them. So while Moses is off doing his thing somewhere else, God sees his people. Is that not incredible to you? Is it? That these people are still suffering, that these people are still crying out to God, and that he is hearing them, and the man that will save them is living somewhere else, doing life, getting himself a wife, starting a family. And I think he probably thought that's just the way it was going to be. I got away with this. Pharaoh's not going to come out here and kill me. By the time he gets here, I'll grow a beard so big he won't even know who I am. Who knows? And then you will see next week, God kind of throws a wrench in that in Exodus 3, like, hey, there's this burning bush. Let me go check it out. He may have regretted that decision the rest of his life. But Moses is called back nonetheless. Now I want to focus a few minutes on what I'm going to call biblical theology, meaning that rarely are these stories of the Old Testament just thrown in our laps and left to deal with it. Very often as Christians, we are reading the Bible backwards because we're reading it through the lens of Christ. We know the end game, if that makes sense. So let's take a look at a few things, because there are levels to understanding Scripture. Most of us can read a given passage and gain some general understanding of it. Like most anyone could pick up Exodus 1 and Exodus 2 and be like, yeah, okay, I get what's happening here. But with a figure like Moses, deep meaning is rarely found only on the surface. If I'm to consider impactful meaning for my life, first I look to God's capability. What is God doing? And I think that is something that you see here, is it not? It's not just about the story, it's how does God live in the story? Because you have it repeated in the New Testament and several times in the Old. Look what God has done. Do you remember Abraham? Do you remember Moses? Do you remember how you were fed in the wilderness? Do you remember? Do you remember? Do you remember? And then you are drawn into that story to ask, if I fed people in the wilderness, if I created water from a rock, if I made sure you were taken care of then, can I not do it now? Right? I mean, that's the question that is asked. The people cried out to God. He heard and he acted, though for the time being it was not in miracles and dark skies, but bravery, disobedience to the Egyptians, and compassion is how that prayer was answered. What we are told outright about this aspect of Moses' story, which is in some way Israel's story, is that it took, and the word starts with an F. What did it take? Faith. It took faith. Faith that there was something compelling these to trust God. Faith from his parents. Faith from these Hebrew midwives. Faith from his sister. Faith even from Moses himself. I want you to read this passage, and here we are outright being shown how to interpret what happens. This is the writer of Hebrews, whoever he or she may be. By faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months by his parents. So it's not Moses' faith here, it is his parents' faith, because they saw he was a beautiful child. And there, the term beautiful might mean something more like unique. Or, they just knew something was different. And they were not afraid of the king's edict. By faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to endure ill treatment with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin. So even notice here, he, by faith, is able to reject what he could have had in Pharaoh's house. Life for him would have been easier. This part I think is interesting. He also, considering the reproach of Christ or the reproach of Messiah, greater riches than the treasures of Egypt. And I don't think it's because necessarily he knew Christ, but his reproaches were like that of Christ, if that makes sense. So the ones that are like his, but who knows? But notice he was looking to the reward. And I wonder if you ask him in those days, ask Moses, what reward were you looking for? I wonder what he would say. What do you think he would say? I don't know. I would agree. And what is that? Christ. Yeah. What would you say? What do you think Moses, what do you think he thought his reward was? Freedom. Okay. What else? And I'm not looking for a specific answer here. I'm just trying to see where, I just find this a really interesting way to interpret what he has done. What's that? Acceptance. All right. What else? What do you think his reward is? For me, I think it's partially, I've done what God has asked me to do, and the reward is my people receiving what God has promised, because he never did. So his reward cannot have been, in his mind at least, walking into promised land, because guess what? He didn't go. We're told he walks up to the top of the mountain. God says, I want to let you see it, buddy, but this is it. And to me, that is one of the most heart-wrenching stories in all the Bible, because I love Moses. And I'm like, could you please just let him put his foot? But God knew what he was doing. So it makes you think, what is this reward? It's something we're told in the next verse that I didn't write here because it's referring to something else. It's something invisible, he says. He sees what cannot be seen. That Moses is looking for something that is beyond even maybe what he understood. And if you read Hebrews 11, there are several of these. This is a very similar thing. So powerful, but it's a lot to think about. Anybody else have anything? Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And much of Moses' life was lived that way, even when he was surrounded by people. And this is what makes his story so immensely beautiful to me. Do y'all remember one of the few people who have changed God's mind? Y'all studying Exodus 32? Will it come up? Yeah. God says when he looks, he gives him the law and he looks down and he's like, look at these people making an idol. Are you joking me right now? They're done. God says they're done. That's it. I've had enough. And what does Moses do? What are they going to say about you, Lord? Is this, that you brought us out here to kill us? And then we are told, quote unquote, the Lord changed his mind. Moses is the one who steps in. It is incredible what he does. And so it is a very lonely position he has. Don't know if those people ever knew that, right? That Moses is the one. And that he alone with God stands on the top of the mountain to breathe his last. So yeah, I agree. He walked a lonely road. He did. Yeah. So I want to close with just these questions because I know our time is up. Thank you all so much for your comments. Hopefully it was intriguing to you to think about some of this stuff. And I know you're looking forward to some of the other speakers as well. But here are the questions. What do you think God is doing now in our day? So you got ahead of me on your question. That was good. What do we think God is doing now? Do we believe he's still working? Yeah. And here's a question that's a hard one. What will become of these youngsters among us? Right? Because that's where Moses was brought up as this child that didn't know what God had in store. Our young people are living in that same thing. What will happen in their life? What will we do in his name? So that admonition is for us who are older as well, but I want you to think about these young guys too. And what all will they do in God's name within our lifetime? Thank y'all so much. Oh, sorry. I'll take all the credit, none of the blame.
That's why I waited. Let's bow as we close in prayer. Our God, our Father in heaven, we're so thankful for this day that we've had and the opportunity to come back this evening. We're so thankful for Daniel that he was able to present this lesson to us on the beginning of Moses and his journey. We're so thankful, Father, for leaving us the scriptures that we can learn and learn by them and also live the principles set before us. We thank you, Father, for this day as well. We're thankful for everyone that was able to come tonight. We ask you to continue to be with our sick of this number, be with our shut-ins, and we ask you to bring us back after next time. For this and all things, we pray in your Son, Jesus' name. Amen.